Hello everyone, picking up where I left off yesterday, I'm going to be taking a look at the DC Multiverse Batman Forever Robin 7-inch action figure from McFarlane Toys. So once again, let's take a look at this packaging, and there's no real surprises here because this is pretty much identical to what we saw with the Val Kilmer Batman. It is the slightly elongated, slightly stretched, slightly oversized DC Multiverse packaging, but otherwise the branding is pretty much on par with what we've seen with every other release in this line. And by now, if you've seen any of my other videos looking at these figures, you'll know that I'm not a huge fan of this branding because I find it to be a little bit bland. It's just black borders and there's not an awful lot going on in it. We do have a fantastic window display, and behind the figure we can see this collage which is blue and white, which does help the figure pop in the packaging, so it does look fairly attractive in that sense. But that being said, it just feels a little bit dull, and that certainly rings true when we look at the side panel, which at least in this case we actually can see the Batman Forever logo at the top of the packaging, which looks great. But otherwise this is quite a chunky panel, and there's a lot more they could do with this space rather than just having the character's name. And as I always say, I think it'd be nice if they took a film still or an image, a film poster, or even an illustrated image of the character that they want to represent, so you can put this on your shelf side by side with your other figures in the collection and actually have something that looks fairly presentable even when the figures aren't on display. The reverse of the packaging likewise is also a little bit dull, and it's made worse by the fact that every single figure in this wave has the exact same reverse, with only a little bit of nuance when it comes to the Build-A-Figure piece that's highlighted in the diagram in the bottom quadrant. We do have a fairly sizable image at the top of the packaging, which is given over to the representation of the Build-A-Figure, the giant bat, which is a kind of unusual choice anyway, I've got to be honest, as a Build-A-Figure, considering that this never actually appeared in the theatrical cut of the film, and it just seems kind of odd. And then to have this image sort of dominate the packaging seems like a missed opportunity, really. I think I would rather have seen the film poster, in all truth. I think that would look a lot more attractive than this illustrated image of a character we don't see in the film. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the action figure itself. Now I have to say, in terms of presentation, it accounts for itself very nicely. It's very bright and colourful, and I like colour in my action figures. Although for this particular version of the character, it's probably a bit of a negative because it's not quite accurate. Because the costume that we see on screen, as you can see here, obviously is a lot more muted in terms of the colour palette. It's also a lot more light reflective and giving it that sort of shimmery sheen that we saw, funnily enough, with the Val Kilmer version. That actually worked really well. The plastic they used there actually had that metallic look to it. This doesn't. And whilst I like that it's fairly bright and colourful, at the same time, it's not quite accurate. Now, in terms of the head sculpt, I think they've done a fairly decent job here of capturing Chris O'Donnell. I think this looks, pretty good for this scale, on the 7-inch scale. I think this works pretty well. Obviously, a lot of his face is given over to that face mask there, but even though that looks very chunky, that does seem to be pretty accurate in terms of the dimensions and proportions that we see on screen. So, all in all, this is fine. It's just really let down by the colouring of the plastic. Now, in terms of sculpting, though, I think this looks really quite good. It's definitely got the general aesthetic that we see on screen, controversial nipples and all. One thing that this figure does do better than we see it on screen, I suppose, is highlight the Robin symbol, because that's not really that noticeable on screen in the costume. And there's a lot of nice little details when it comes to the gauntlets. We can actually see a number of different layers on the gauntlets, which is quite nice. And of course, we have the individual fins there as well. Very distinct, very different to what we see from the Batman in this film, which obviously was a lot more seamless and sort of one piece. Here they're individual sharp jagged fins, which look really cool. Now Robin's boots are quite interesting. Now I'm guessing they have to be screen accurate. All the other details seem to be pretty much spot on, so I'm guessing that is the case here. But I do know I've seen these before on the McFarlane Toys 7-inch scale line, and I'm pretty sure they are on the George Clooney Batman figure, so that's kind of interesting that they've managed to recycle that part. Now, one thing McFarlane have done really well on this figure is actually manage his cape, because this is actually a much thicker material and it has a wire in it, which is vastly superior to the Batman, funnily enough. So I love this cape. I think this works really, really well. I'm glad they've opted for a cloth cape as well. That means, of course, you can sit him in the Batmobile, which is pretty exciting. But I love having cloth texture on my action figures. It just adds something extra, another dimension, and I think this looks really good, and it's great that we can pose it. Looking at the articulation, he does have a ball joint at the top of the neck, so the head will rotate all the way around, and it will actually lean left and right much more than the Batman. However, when it comes to looking up and down, there is plenty of movement here, but I wouldn't say it's as strong as the Batman, which is kind of interesting. Now, he does have a ball joint in the shoulder, and there is that butterfly wing joint, although it does have a tendency to want to show off a little bit of an ugly seam, a little bit of an ugly gap there, which isn't great. But of course, he does have the bicep swivel, he's got the double joint at the elbow, and of course, he's got that weird ball joint that McFarlane toys use for the wrist, so the hand will hinge up and down, and it will spin all the way around, but it's a little bit clunky. Now, he's got the same 2 points of articulation as the Batman has in the torso, so he can swivel from side to side, he can lean left and right a good amount, and it's great that we have 2 points here. That means that he can bend back a really good distance, although oddly not forwards very much, which is interesting. He does have ball joints in the hips, so the legs will kick out to the side, and you can kind of adjust that as well from side to side. The legs will go forwards a good distance, don't go back too far. There is a double joint at the knee, so the lower leg kicks all the way back there. There is a swivel at the top of the ankle, allowing that foot to move from side to side. It will hinge up and down as well, and then we finally have some toe articulation. So how does Robin fare when it comes to the accessories? Well, not great is the answer. He comes with just an additional 2 pairs of hands, 2 gripping hands, and a pointing hand and an open palm hand. Now, these are great, don't get me wrong, but where are the accessories in terms of batarangs or grapple guns or whatever the heck it is that Robin has in this film? I've got to be honest, I know he has plenty in Batman and Robin. Maybe he doesn't have anything in Batman Forever. It has been a while since I revisited this film, so maybe this is accurate, but I'm pretty sure he had something. He must have something, surely. And it feels like we're missing something here, I think. And as we saw in the last video, here he is in terms of scaling next to the Batman. Now, he's slightly shorter than the Batman, and I think that is fairly accurate, and I think that works pretty well. The height discrepancy looks to be, yeah, pretty much spot on, I think, from what I would expect to see. And this is great. This looks really good. So, closing remarks from me, I'm going to give this figure 4 stars. Now, I dropped the star because, well, you know, there is inaccuracies here when it comes to the colorization of the costume. Also, not entirely satisfied with the lack of accessories. On the other hand, though, I do feel like it definitely warrants a star when it comes to that cape, because I think that's fantastic and actually far superior to the Batman that we saw, and I think the articulation scheme's really solid, and I think, you know, the sculpting is also very, very good on this figure. So all in all, this is a pretty solid release. I think it's very nicely done. It's just really let down by the colorization in terms of the accuracy, so I've got to keep that star off there. Otherwise, this could have met the Val Kilmer and been a 5-star, so I'm not quite sure why they made that decision. But all in all, this is, you know, a nice figure. You're going to want to pick this up if you're getting the Val Kilmer, because you've got it right, they're a pair, so it's Batman and Robin, so you're probably going to grab this one anyway, and it's a pretty decent figure. It's just a shame about that colouring. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving the video a like. That kind of thing really does help the channel out, and it allows me to keep making more content. And if you're interested in seeing more content, remember to hit subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.